RAD, the same as they authorized it?
I don't think so. It's a good question.
Once it's started, it's...
I think so. Now, Mr. DeVere, you spoke just a little while ago about some right that I'm not familiar with, about dissolution of a RAD.
It's not in the law.
That question had been asked when you guys were up, and the attorney that we had up there read the section, that talks about this. And I don't know if Bob has it handy, or
Bob, have you had a chance to see that section of code yet?
I could find no section that allows for dissolution.
Okay.
I studied it very carefully today, and
That's
I
right.
couldn't find it.
You got it for good.
Well, that's a good question, and I think that question too will need to be put into the public process that will go forward, as it does not technically pertain to the completeness of the petition.
Mr. Fleming, if I...
Mr. Litzy, we've already given you a chance to speak. I'll give you just a bit more. Go ahead.
Okay. If you approve this as complete, it goes to the next process. According to the law, at any time, Snowshoe Mountain wants to put in 1,464 units simply by turning in the thing.
Well, Mr. Litzy, we've already covered that ground.
They can do that.
Well, if they do that, they're obviously going to need some objection here. So.
But they will have enough votes so that they can overwhelm even the 25%.
It has to be approved by us too, and if some backdoor play is made to put extra lots in, you're going to find me very upset about that. I'm not concerned about that myself. I think this has been open and above.
That's undeveloped property.
Yeah, undeveloped is different than developed, correct? So the 25% has to come from the developed,
Improved property.
and that's with houses or something built in.
No.
Well, that's a question for Mr. DeBerry.
25% is of the total,
I thought it had to be
including
developed.
unimproved.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
That's my understanding.
Ask that again for Mr. DeBerry.
On the 25% to dissolve a vote, or to stop it.
To stop the petition.
Does that have to be developed or commercial property?
No, it's 25% of the prospective members. So every
you have an undeveloped
one
lot.
property owner. So for that case, Snowshoe is one member, right? Because we are one owner of property. So it's the total number of members, regardless of your ownership, for the purpose of the petition.
Basically, the people on this list.
Right,
It's
exactly.
basically the people on the list that are going to get notice.
That's exactly what it is. And then when it comes to voting for board members, it becomes a one vote per property vote that you have.
So if the same person would own 10 different properties, they would get 10 different votes?
Sign a petition once, but you get 10 votes for board members.
Okay.
Okay.
Just
One more thing, Mr. Mark. Go ahead.
no, that's why I asked the question about the unimproved, all those lots, because I was thinking maybe Snowshoe won the commercial property, not commercial, the
Undeveloped.
thank you, would have one vote per each of those declared little parcels.
For board voting, that is true. For the petition, that is not true.
All right, Mr. Withrow, you haven't had a chance to speak. Nothing to say at this time? Okay. Mr. Moffitt?
No, sir.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Well, I think what I'll do then is I'll go ahead and call to see if we got a motion on the acceptance of the Snowshoe Resort Area District petition. Is there a motion to accept it as complete?
I'd like to ask just one more
Please.
quick question that Mr. Altman brought up on the acreage. This is the first I've heard of that. Where does that fall into play at here?
Acreage comes into play only at the time of the initial petition. And Ira may remember that early on when we were having these discussions, we were talking about what would it take to get this thing moving, right? And I said at the time, I'll set this up however you guys feel fair. I said, if we want this thing to move, the simplest thing, because let's face it, I'm the one, instigating this whole thing, is set it up so that the petition could at least be initiated simply by Snowshoe. And that's what we've done, is we've initiated, Snowshoe is initiating this petition. I said, if we think that it should be more than that, I'm amenable to that. However, realize that that initial mobilization, will very likely delay the process. The group who sat there, which is, I'm not reaching by saying this, but, out of 14 people who regularly attend, 12 of them are homeowners, right? That group agreed that for initiating the petition, it was fair to say, let Snowshoe go through. Let us bear the costs of the notice that has to be given. We will do that. Everything else is based on ownership and number of parcels you own. And the acreage piece was to say, here's the acreage of the district. What's the right amount, because you can't have, what's the right number or right way to measure how much of the ownership of this district can start the petition?
Okay.
And we came up with the 61% by acreage. There was a lot of discussion after that.
Good.
So, Mr. Martin, is that your idea of how it got started also? I mean, do you agree with that part of it?
With what Mr. Dewberry said, yes,
Okay.
that was the concept, that was the representation.
So once it goes into play, then it's gonna revert back to the homeowners then, or the property owners, rather than going continuing on by our acreage, as Mr. Alderman. Is that right or wrong, or?
Well, as he said, there's a number of factors that you have to look at. Like Mr. Dewberry said, there are certain areas which have already been lotted off, okay, and he agreed to go by those lots. There's acreage that's just blank acreage. It's not going to be lotted up. Obviously they could have gone and taken all the blank acreage they have, divvied it into lots, and created more votes in terms of the per parcel vote. But they didn't do that. It's only for purposes of this thing, of the subsequent vote, not for purposes of this.
Mr. Walker, did that answer your question pretty well?
Thank you.
Okay.
I do want to point out that I did look again at the letter submission of 318, and that did kickstart the process rather than this meeting.
Okay.
So our 60 days to make the determination of completeness began to run on 318.
Okay.
But that was not presented to the county clerk. I know that for a fact. I went in to get it and she didn't have a copy of it. So it was not officially given to her. For several days, Sue knows I came in here. They couldn't have started. I was worried that would be the very thing would happen. Someone would start to say it was running from the time that Mr. DeBerry brought it in here. He did not present it to the county clerk, and she will testify to that.
That just has to pertain to us judging the completeness of the petition. That's for tonight's action.
Well, what
After
is
when
it talking
mailing
about the
starts,
timeline?
There's another 60 days.
The timeline. Yeah, well, he's trying to say the timeline that's already started.
Well,
Are you saying
well,
that, Mr. DeBerry?
Whether it started then or it's kind of irrelevant in the sense that it's before us now as considering the completeness. We have 60 days from the time it's presented to us. And it was presented to us by Mr. DeBerry in person on March 18th with the commission. So that, to my thinking, that gives us till May 18th or May 17th or roughly to consider what we're considering tonight. Now, to be clear though, if we determine it complete tonight, Mr. Alderman, then Mr. Berry has to, as the person putting forth the proposal, has to do the mailing. He states that that'll happen on or before April 25th. There's an explanation as to how that process will be conducted with the Postal Service here. You certainly have a copy of that. And then it's no sooner than 60 days can we come back to meet again. So it has to be at least 60 days.
What do you mean by complete?
That we like the way it's worded, that we don't need any further changes to the petition, and then it goes into public process.
There was a mention that the assessor produced this document. I think he'll say he didn't produce this document. Did you?
Well, Mr.
Tom?
Alderman,
The document, he's got the list of property owners.
we have the list of property owners presented to us here.
But Tom didn't do it.
Correct.
Okay.
The law states what's a complete petition, so it's easy to determine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and see if there's a motion to accept the petition as complete. Mr. Marker, you're referring to, what are you referring to specifically?
On what, the law, or what?
Please clarify what you mean about your statement you just made.
Just made? Oh, there's a section said as far as developing, submitting a petition to the county commission.
Yes, that's what
And
you
there's
call
a
it.
list of what has to be in that.
Yes,
petition.
that like a letter from the tax department, for example, saying that
Right.
the receipts are as follows.
You know,
We do have that documentation, yes.
you know, so that defines what's needs to be done.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to deem the petition complete? I'll go ahead and make that motion for the purpose of moving this forward. Is there any further discussion by the commissioners or objections to the motion to deem this petition complete? We do have more time as well, if you're not comfortable at this point.
So basically, we're just approving now that he can send the letters out to the property owners, and then there'll be a 60-day period from that point on for them to reply back. And there's gonna be one more meeting before it's approved.
There has to be at least one. You can hold more, but there has to be at least one.
So does them all have to be done with before that 60 days or after that 60 days? That's, I
It'd
don't
be
know.
people writing in saying they're opposed.
Well, yeah, or just showing up in a meeting saying, when does the first meeting happen after the letters are mailed out? 60 days?
You have
Then
to
you
say-
have a meeting, or before the 60 days?
That's a public hearing.
There has to be at least one, no
Before.
sooner than 60 days.
Okay, so you
After.
wait 60 days and then
Right.
have one meeting.
I don't know, I would think you would be allowed to have additional ones in the interim if you wanted, using your normal notice procedures. But you have to have one at least 60 days away from the date that we mail that. And we can't mail that until you give us the date.
I interpreted Mr. DeBerry to mean, well, I guess, at a commission meeting, anytime we can talk about anything we want.
Right.
However, my understanding of this process as is in the legislation is that if we deem this complete tonight, that we have to, no sooner than 60 days can we have a public meeting to consider adoption of the petition. Is that?
I know that you have to have one at least 60 days away. I would probably leave it to your attorneys to decide if you could have one before that.
Well, I would think it would be a good idea, after the letter's mailed and everybody is notified, to have at least one meeting to get input and questions. And then maybe a couple weeks later, have a final meeting to resolve everything. Because we'll probably go get hit with stuff just like tonight that we haven't even heard of before.
Right. Certainly.
I was gonna make a suggestion too. I feel like we need more than one.
Okay.
And I mean, people have other things they have to go to, and we give an opportunity for people to come other than just one time.
Well, and it's gonna give everybody, they're gonna start talking probably more after everybody's notified. So if some of them shows up at the first meeting and then they go home and call some of their friends,
That's right.
you might get more input at the second meeting also if there's more questions. That's just,
Brian, for your vote, can we, as far as the 25%, can that be done by proxy? It doesn't, it just says a written,
Says
complaint
right.
against it. But elsewhere, when it talks about voting, it can be done by email, proxy, in person, or in writing. I just wondered on this 25%, if that can be done by proxy and email.
My feeling is probably no.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in reading this petition as I have, my understanding is each property owner would have to write to us and say they're
That makes
opposed
it
to the
almost
petition.
impossible
Well,
to get.
or sign a petition.
Okay.
So each HOA could, you could distribute petitions to the HOA and your members all signed it.
Okay.
Sir,
Your
If you
meeting
don't-
has to
if
be,
you don't
your
have-
meeting has to be 60 days after the notice is sent.
I think that's right.
I'm reading it right here, it's
Okay.
725-6, subsection C. And it says, at least 60 days prior to the date of the meeting, the notice required by this section shall, using reasonable efforts, be mailed to each owner, etc. So your notice, you send the notice out, if Mr. DeBerry sends it out on the 25th, then you have to give 60 days from that date before you can have the meeting.
That's my understanding too, Bob. Thanks for letting me know that.
But we can have more
More
than
than
one
one,
meeting.
absolutely.
Yes, you can,
I'm all
but
for
it
having
says,
more
it
meetings
says
as
that
we
at
need.
that meeting, then changes can be proposed. The 25% is calculated,
Okay,
and one of the things that people may be concerned about, if you get this letter in the mail and you write no on it and send it back in, their accountants are gonna have to count that as a negative vote.
yeah.
And if it hits 25%, it's dead for a year anyway.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in
Yes, sir.
discussion for a year, isn't it?